You.
All right.
Still on mute, Serenity.
Sorry, didn't see that. Oh, thank you all for being here today. I'm Serenity Ebert. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about transit equity. I know that when you think of transit equity, you probably think you're thinking mostly of, racial, economic equity. But I'm here to tell you that in order for a transit system to be truly equitable, it has to include disability. And making it more equitable for people with disabilities will make it more equitable for everyone else. So I have two stories I want to tell here today. One, let me give you the first one. It was a warm night and I was on the bus going towards home. There was a driver and being trained on the bus. And I was getting off at the Southwest Washington streetcar stop. So the door opened and I turned around with my walker and grabbed the handle like I often do to step down backwards. But I didn't realize we weren't that near the curb. So I felt my foot slipped and I fell backwards onto the curb, hurting my foot that was already hurting. Everyone rushed out to help me up and everything and make sure I was okay. I kind of limped over to the bench across the street. But somebody must have called the police because as I was talking to my mom on the phone, this officer came up to me to make sure I was okay and said they must have been concerned. Anyway, he ended up giving me a ride home. So now I can say I've been in the back of a squad car, which I never could say before.
Buttercup.
So, I could think of a few things that would remedy this situation, make sure it never happens again. Should I have requested the ramp? Yes, maybe. I was in a hurry and it just didn't seem prudent at the time. The first thing that would remedy this is level boarding. And doors to open automatically, so we don't have to depend on equipment that the driver may or may not know how to use. I'm sorry, I lost my place. A good example I like to use of level boarding would be the KC streetcar, which is I've is completely level for, wheelchairs and strollers and anything with wheels. And another example would be BART in San Francisco. Another example would be the DC streetcar in Washington, DC. I also wanted to mention BRT, which is kind of a cross between the streetcar and a bus. But is cheaper to build than both, or either one separately. According to Wikipedia, which I know may not be an authoritative resource, I didn't have time to confirm this. As of 2018, 144, I think it was, cities had BRT. It's kind of like a streetcar shaped bus, I guess. The doors open automatically and it has level boarding. You pay, it has pre-boarding fare. So you pay in the station, not on the bus. Okay, my second story here is a streetcar story. One time I was on the streetcar. It was a warm day. I think it was summer, and the equipment on the streetcar is notorious for breaking down. This happens every summer. I was right out here at the Southwest Jefferson stop. I had pushed the ramp request button. Possibly not soon enough. I don't know. Anyway, the doors opened without the ramp having deployed. So I stood up with my walker and turned around to step down backwards. But the doors started moving behind me. It startled me and caused me to stumble backwards. So my foot slid off the curb into the gutter and I fell backwards onto the curb. The ramp still tried to deploy. But I fell off the streetcar a number of times, but I've never had the ramp try to deploy on top of me. Let me tell you, it was a very frightening experience. And of course, there were lots of people at the streetcar stop that tried to help me up. Excuse me. But unfortunately, they didn't realize that my foot was stuck. When I finally managed to get up, the driver came out and asked me what had happened. I don't really know what I told him, but he said, "So the door did open?" Yeah. And I didn't know what else to say. And I just kind of stumbled across the street and into my building here. Thank goodness I was almost home. This could all have been avoided by doors that opened automatically. And ramps that deployed automatically. And or level boarding, which would, you know, it would make the other things unnecessary.
Serenity, this is Steve. You asked me to give you a time check. So it's been about 9 or 10 minutes since you began, just so to give you a time check.
Thank you, Steve.
Of course.
I just lost my place again.
Sorry.
Level boarding, it should make these other things unnecessary. Or in lieu of that, a button that other people might recognize as a button. Because I have noticed that when you ask someone else to hit the ramp request button, they often won't know what you're talking about because they don't recognize it as a button. So if you can make it more recognizable as a button to everyone else, that might solve some of the problem. And also not make it so you have to push it soon enough. Stop. And I think I totally flubbed here, but yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Serenity. Steve, did you want to take it away?
I think that I was going to go last. And so I know David Griffiths was trying to join. David,
All right. I think he just got on.
David, do you need a breather, or would you be ready? We could go to one of the other speakers if you were still kind of collecting your thoughts. You're still on mute though, David. I can see you're on mute still.
All right. Should we pivot to Anna? Oh, there he is.
Hi, can you hear me now?
I'm getting an echo,
It
David.
was really bad.
Yeah, there's some feedback.
Yeah.
Are you maybe
Okay,
David?
let me try something different.
That
Okay.
there wasn't that time. There wasn't any feedback. Just there, David.
Should we pivot to Anna?
Anna or Abby, I think would be great.
Yeah, let's have somebody else go.
This is Anna. I can go, and I'll introduce Abby real quick and then hand it over to her. So hi, I'm Anna Zivarts. I'm the director of the Disability Mobility Initiative, which is a program of Disability Rights Washington. I live in Seattle. I'm a low vision mom. And I want to introduce Abby. Abby Griffiths is one of the folks who participated in a recent project that we began last fall called our Mobilize WA Story Map, where we spent a couple of months, and we're still doing it actually, interviewing people from across the state of Washington who can't or don't drive for whatever reason. Many of those folks are folks like Abby and I who are disabled, but there's also folks who don't drive for other reasons as well. And so we wanted to have our stories start to connect with each other and start to get them out there in the world, so that as our elected leaders and our policymakers are talking about how to fund transportation and what our priorities should be, that our needs are part of the conversation. And so I want to turn it over to Abby. Abby is one of the folks we interviewed. She lives in Vancouver and has a really wonderful story and is a tremendous advocate who's done a bunch of advocacy in the legislature this year. She's written op-eds. She did a press conference with us a month or so ago. And so Abby, if you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute and If you can turn on your camera, great. If not, we'll listen to your voice. And it might take Abby just a second to do this because she's navigating Zoom with a screen reader, which is not simple. It is a real challenge. So while Abby is doing that, I can talk a little bit more about what we found. And I'm just gonna see if I can click. I saw her on here a second ago, I thought.
Okay.
There we go. I hear you.
Yes, I am here. Hi, everyone. My name is Abby Griffiths. I live in Vancouver, Washington. I am totally blind. I grew up in Ridgefield, Washington. We're 25 minutes away from Vancouver. Growing up in Ridgefield, Washington, I did not have any public transportation in my area. I'm saying I did not have any public transportation in Ridgefield, and a blind person living there, and people who cannot afford to drive by vehicles live there is just a very big struggle. We do have this something called Ridgefield Connector, which runs only weekdays and 3 times a day. That is like 7 a.m., 12 p.m., and 5 p.m. Imagine people traveling only 3 times a day. If I leave my house 7 a.m., I don't get back 12 p.m., even though my appointment's like 15 minutes or 30 minutes. I have to wait hours and hours to get next bus to get home. I really struggled living in Ridgefield. Rural area, always transportation departments forget about. And as blind person, that is very struggle for me. I never get to places and celebrating with my friends and get out and do things. And I have single mom only who drives car, and she's full-time working, and I didn't even have people who can drive me around. So I got stuck in the house. When you can't leave your house, you're depressed and stressed. And that all happened to me. Luckily, I moved out of Ridgefield now. I live in Vancouver, Washington, and low-income housing. Closest bus stop to my low-income housing is 12-minute walk. Think about this. I didn't have any transportation in Ridgefield, and now in my low-income housing, low-income people who live in low-income housing who need more transportation access, but that is not true. So I have to walk 10, 12 minutes to get to the bus stop, and bus is not frequent. 30-minute weekdays entire hour. If I end up missing my bus, I sit at bus stop entire hour waiting for another bus in the rain, cold, sun. Like, it's just like suffering. And the busy streets, walking to 12-minute waiting entire hour if I miss my bus is, if as you can imagine, that is very struggle. I am student, and I go to Washington State University. So getting from my low-income housing to Washington State University takes me 3 buses in over 2 hours. How I did it. I will be graduating in 2 weeks. I did it, but it's a struggle. It's a challenge. And none of people who drive don't go through what I'm going through. Another story I have is I lived in Portland too for a few years, and I moved to Vancouver last year. I still have a place in Portland. I ride TriMat buses, trains a lot, equally Citroen and the TriMat I ride. But my story I wanted to share with you guys is that when I ride TriMat, Max train, Yellow Line train, I take it a lot because it connects me to Vancouver. and I also take a green line, blue line, and things like that. But my incident was that I always pay my fare, but fare inspector coming to the train asked me, show him my ticket. I showed him my ticket, and he thinks that's not good enough. I paid. I always make sure I pay my fare, and I paid. He can't see it. But instead of worrying about my ticket, he asked me honor citizen pass. I really don't know what that was. He refused to explain to me what it was. Instead, he used very aggressive tones and stressed me out on the train. That happened in 2019. Still, when I get in the train, if I'm by myself, I am stressing, always like, oh Lord, my body always wanted to jump. Always just like stress and anxiety. I have to catch train, I have to ride, but my stress and the trauma still happening to me. Because trauma decided to put people who are very aggressive, who are white males, who never experienced trauma and anxiety or like overcome racial trauma. These people always come up after people like myself and it's stressing me out for not knowing to have honor citizens card. I think it was not fair to me. And thank you so much. That is my story.
Thank you, Abby. Michael, do you want to go next? Anna?
This is Anna again. I'll hand it over to other folks, David or yeah, Michael, go ahead. I really do think that it's wonderful to have folks like Abby involved in being public and sharing their stories and involved with this activism. And just want to point out that one of the things that we're working for here is to get rid of fare enforcement and to get rid of fares on transit. It's just a way to harass folks who either can't afford the fare or for people with disabilities, create extra barriers and result in folks getting harassed or ending up in the criminal justice system. And so we successfully passed some legislation this year with other allies in the Washington State Legislature around sound transit and removing fare enforcement from the criminal justice system. But we want to continue to push for transit to be fare-free as a way to reduce barriers and ensure that everyone can use the service without harassment, without racial profiling.
Thank you. And right here, I just wanted to mention that in my research, I found that both the Kansas City streetcar and the DC streetcar are fare-free.
David, do you want to go ahead and go now?
I could. I was kind of hoping to go next to last, but if now is the time, then I'll go ahead. So hi, I'm David Griffiths, and I've been disabled my entire life. I've been a transit user for the last 30 years or so. And I've been a cyclist for almost 50, the chair of the Washington State Democrats Disabilities Issues Caucus. But I've worn a lot of different hats over the years. And a lot of my work has been around issues of equity and accessibility in all modes of transportation, not just public transit. And as a disabled transit user, I've had my share of problems and I could tell you stories for days. But I think what might be more useful here is to talk about the larger patterns that I've seen between my own stories and stories that I've heard or watched play out in front of me. And I'll just say, between all of these different stories, I have come to understand that there is one common element. And to me, that speaks to one root cause for all of these problems. And unfortunately, identifying a single root cause doesn't necessarily make them any easier to fix. But as far as I can tell, ultimately it all boils down to unconscious ableist attitudes. And I'm not just talking about individual attitudes on the part of vehicle operators or customer service people or whatever boards or committees that people may interact with. I'm talking about the deeply rooted systemic ableism that is baked in to the institutional culture, not only of the the transportation industry, but in every aspect of our social infrastructure. And just to be clear, I don't blame anyone who's involved in the transportation industry in any way for those attitudes. This problem is older than any of them and bigger than all of them. Ableism runs deep in this country, almost as deep as racism. And now I'm beginning to see some increased awareness of the depth and breadth of institutional racism in our society and in this country. And now that that's on the table and it is entering public discourse, I think now is the time to also bring similar awareness to the depth and breadth of institutional ableism. And I think if we really want to deal with all of these problems that we're talking about, sorry about that, we need to look beyond the individual problems and we need to look at the whole picture. And most importantly, we need to be willing to acknowledge that the whole picture is much, much bigger than we've been led to believe. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Oh, were you finished with your presentation? I know that you introduced Abby, but before I went, I just want to make sure that you didn't have anything.
Yeah, go ahead and we can talk more and if there's questions. And yeah, I'll just say that I posted some links into the chat from our story map project, and I encourage folks to go there and read more about the stories from folks that we interviewed. I think there's a lot of knowledge and expertise there that we all can learn from. And so, yeah, it's mobilizewa.org is the URL. And I'll just say that for me, this has been a really wonderful process to get to talk to so many other folks who are non-drivers for whatever reason. I grew up in Olympia as someone with who's low vision and haven't been able to drive my whole life, and felt very isolated and alone in that situation. I moved to New York for a while, and there it was sort of wonderful to be surrounded by such a rich transportation system and so many other folks. It was almost as if I wasn't disabled there in many ways, because the transportation system worked so well for my needs. Coming back to Washington, again, I knew I would be coming back into a place that was dominated by cars and where the assumption was that you go somewhere, you're going to drive there. And so everything's sort of set up to be convenient for drivers, and other folks, other needs aren't considered. And so that's the work we're trying to do, is trying to change that. And it's been really, really incredible to get to connect to folks like Abby and others who don't drive, to understand that we're not alone. We are, 25% of the population here in Washington State, at least. And so there's a lot of us out there, and it's time for us to start being more visible and fighting for better access and a transportation system that can really actually include all of us. So I'll end it there.
Awesome. Well, hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Hoyt-Mcbeth. I use he, his pronouns. I'm with the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and among my work within the Bureau is I'm the program manager for the Bike Town programs, our bike share program. And I just wanted to thank Serenity for her leadership in putting this panel together, and all of her work in the community and how she's kind of helped inform the way that I approach our work with Bike Town. And the whole panel is just really a pleasure to be here with everyone. And so what I wanted to talk about a little bit was just kind of the origin story for Adaptive Bike Town, which is why I'm on the panel today. And for those who don't know, Adaptive Bike Town is part of our our family of Bike Town programs within the city, and it's the program that expressly is focused on increasing bicycle access for people with disabilities. And it's really great to have David on this panel too, because David has such a key role in the reason we have Adaptive Bike Town. So Bike Town was really, really hard for me to get off the ground. I worked on it for, I think, 6 or 7 years before we actually were able to launch it. It was a very complicated process. We had to work through a lot of things on the financing and logistics and siting place. And one of the things that I didn't do was find a way or consider the needs of people with disabilities. And about 2 months before we launched, some disability activists came to the city and said, we want you to provide accommodation for us and have a way to do it. And we didn't have a way to do that. And so my approach to it, and I think this is, I'll just use, my feelings are always, I think, where I find a lot of my wisdom. So I guess that's the only way I could say that I have some wisdom. These are many of my missteps, but I was really stuck on how the system wouldn't work for people with disabilities. And I was just like, oh, I kept on thinking of the things that were wrong, how the system just didn't fit. Like it wasn't like the right use case for people with disabilities. And where we were headed was kind of an ADA accommodation complaint and kind of actually litigating it. And you always know as a bureaucrat that when you are trying to just meet the letter of a law, especially around accessibility, you know you're kind of in the wrong place, because the law is, even though ADA I think was really revolutionary where it happened. I mean, at Peabody and other areas, we don't go by ADA. We have our standard is much higher than ADA. So anyway, we were headed down a pretty gnarly path. And David reached out to just as a member of the community, invited our director, Leah Treat, to attend the Adaptive Bike Clinic, which for those of you, some of you may not know, is this wonderful clinic that happens every year in June. And so this is kind of a younger version of David and myself. And so I went, and Leah, our director, just said, look, take your clipboard and just talk to people and just ask them questions. And so I met with David, I interviewed David, and I just started talking to people at the event of like these were all people who were very interested in bicycling, or either were interested or already avid bicyclists like David. And just began to, it was just talking about what their needs were, what they would want in having a rental system or what their access was like. And it really just kind of flipped in my head. And I think I'm not sure how much I can speak for the rest of the project team, but really just to think about like, let's think about designing something for access. Let's forget about the word bike share and let's think about what bike share is about, which is increasing access for people. And how can we think of a program that's designed for just for increasing access, and don't worry so much about like what bike share is. Let's think about the community. And so David really set PBOT on the right path, which was designing a program that was really based on the needs of the community. And so we went through a 9-month kind of community engagement and design process, which was really about designing a program to meet this goal of increasing access for people with disabilities. And from that process, we ended up with Adaptive Bike Town. And Adaptive Bike Town really tried to focus on what the community told us they wanted as a customer. So we kind of tried to build the project based on the customer. And that was, they wanted something for recreation. They were not interested as much in a point-to-point system, i.e. a one-way system, but they wanted to be able to go somewhere and be able to go on a ride. And they wanted to be able to return to the place that they started. They wanted to have a place for storage so that if they had things, either if they were going to be, if they were in a wheelchair or other mobility devices, they wanted to make sure there was a place to keep it that was safe and secure. And they wanted somewhere where it was actually safe. They didn't want to be riding on the street. They were looking for something that was actually off, kind of on a trail network or somewhere that was very, very low traffic. And so all those things were really baked into the design of the program that we had. And I just wanted to say thank you. I can't say thank you to everyone in this slide, but all of the people here were a part of that Adaptive Bike Town work group that really helped us to design the program. And we're really proud of the successes that we've had with the program. We modeled, we talked a lot with the folks in the city of Eugene. They've had an adaptive rental program for over 25 years. And we asked them, we kind of like asked them just to share their wisdom and also what we should be thinking about in terms of ridership. And they told us, if you ever get to 100 rentals in a year, you're going to be doing really, really well. So that was coming from a program that had 25 years of experience. And in our first year, we did over 100 rentals, and except for if we kind of put COVID aside, which has been a very unique year, we've been over 200 rentals, and we're actually looking now to go ahead and increase the size of the program and adding some more adaptive electric assist adaptive bikes. And also to increase the size of the fleet. So it's really been an incredible journey for us. In this photo, you can see in the blue short sleeve shirt, my colleague Liz Horman, who was my kind of staff colleague that we worked together on kind of developing this program. Roshan Korean is the current project manager for the program. And going to stop there just so we can kind of have a lot of time for question and answers, or as opposed to me just kind of blathering on about how much I love Adaptive Bike Town. Oh, I think the last thing I just wanted to say is that we went from kind of being kind of staring down to a ADA accommodation complaint and kind of going through a really ugly kind of process to being a model because of the activism and because of people like David and Serenity, to a model where the city of Oakland, the city of Chicago have both, and the city of Detroit have all developed similar adaptive rental programs in tandem with their bike share program. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. I also wanted to put this link in the chat to a wheelchair accessible escalator I found in my research. It's in Tokyo. So I'll just do that now. And you can click on it and watch it at your leisure. It's only like a minute long. So do we have any questions before I go on?
Serenity, there was a question, someone had asked if Adapted by Town and the other by Town program were operated by the same operator, and I failed to to recognize Albertina Kerr through the Kerr Bikes program, who is the operator of the program. Kerr Bikes has a rural site on the west side of the waterfront park, and they also have a site on the East Bank Esplanade near OMSI. And Kerr Bikes is the operator of the program. So thank you very much for that question. I might cover something I forgot to cover.
Thank you. As probably obvious by now, which I forgot to say at the beginning, I am a disabled cyclist and activist, which I apologize for forgetting to mention. And what I have noticed about the streetcar and the Max is that I am not allowed to take my trike on the Max. Say, if I want to go over a highway or across a freeway, how am I supposed to do that? There's no safe way for me to get there. The ADA says that I have the right to choose my mobility device. When I'm on my trike, that is my mobility device. I have no walker, I have no wheelchair. So what else am I supposed to do? I can't really grab on behind the Max or the streetcar. That would be dangerous. And I'm not allowed on the Max or the streetcar. Apparently it's dangerous or something. I don't know. Not really true. You can't just sorry, I'm collecting my thoughts here. Your rules for what's allowed on this Max and the streetcar should be determined by the actual dangers, imminent dangers that you see, and not by what you might imagine. Like, if you might imagine that my trike is dangerous, it doesn't mean it actually is. It's not much bigger than a mobility scooter. The strange thing is, I used to ride an upright tricycle, and I took that on the Max all the time, and no one said a word about it, which is very odd to me. I just want the same transportation opportunities that were promised to me by the ADA. And I thought I could get that here in Portland, but sadly, it has fallen far short of expectations.
Thank you, Serenity. It looks like we have a couple questions in the chat. Do you see that?
Yeah, I saw them. I'm trying to read them now.
Serenity, this is Anna. While you're doing that, I just wanted to sort of build off something that you were saying around your bicycle being your mobility device. And I think that's something that we need to have more conversations expanding what everyone considers mobility devices. And the default is, well, a car is a mobility device. But the reality is that there's all sorts of mobility devices that help people who identify as disabled and people who don't, want to identify as disabled, but perhaps, that device is the best way for them to get around. I'm low vision, I bike, and I've definitely had my choice to do that questioned, but for me, it's way safer than driving. And it feels safe for me in the right conditions to bike. And so we need to, I think, and this connects to a conversation I'm going to be part of on Friday at this conference around micromobility, but thinking much more broadly about ways that lots of things can be mobility devices and should have space to exist and should be easy to use in combination with transit. And we just don't design for that right now. We design very narrowly, except for cars. And so I hope for a world one day where we can have all kinds of devices that are e-assist as needed, that we have the space on our streets to accommodate them, the secure, the dry parking, the charging stations, and that there's not the stigma and the separation between what is, considered a wheelchair, a mobility device for someone who's disabled, and a mobility device for everyone else. That we can have a much more inclusive space that allows all of us to pick the mobility device that's going to work for us. Yeah, and doing that in a way that also doesn't gut the ADA or the protections that were really, really hard fought protections that do, in some ways transform access for disabled folks, or should, but also sort of separate us. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Anna. And Rachel, I wanted to answer your question about elevators at transit stops. I usually don't have issues with the elevators at the stations. Most of them are big enough. Some of them are a little awkwardly shaped, which might give me problems. But I am usually able to get off and maneuver the trike so it fits in. Although I can't do it very often because it makes my eyes hurt. I see we have some more questions here. I'm just trying to read them right now.
John, I saw that, or sorry, Steve, I saw that you answered John's question in the chat, but did you want to maybe elaborate a little bit more about that adaptive bike town question?
Sure, I'll try to be brief, Erin. Thank you. So John asked the question of if one does not have a disability or identify as a person with a disability, can they use the system? And the answer to that question is yes. The system is open to all people. Kerr Bikes, our operator, provides a discounted rate for usage for people who qualify for a TriMet Honored Citizens Pass. You don't have to show a pass. You just need to be someone who qualifies for that. So that would be a person with a disability, a person who's a senior citizen, or a person living on low income. And then for others who do not fit those criteria, you pay a similar kind of retail rate to what incur charges for its other bike rentals.
Great, thanks, Steve. And it looks like we have a couple of other questions. For any of our speakers, what transit needs are you hearing from folks with cognitive or developmental disabilities? What changes would help them travel more easily? Anybody want to take that?
I don't hear from people with cognitive disabilities very often, but I'm thinking that clear signage that was more clear and concise would help. Like announcing that the ramp was deploying and not to hold the doors open. And that's really the only one I can think of at the moment.
This is
But I'm sure there are many more.
Sorry, Serenity. This is Anna. I can speak to, I think in the interviews we did, one thing that jumped out to me is that many folks with cognitive disabilities or intellectual disabilities live with their families. And often that can be in rural areas that aren't served by transit or don't have sidewalks. And so for many folks, while they can't get a driver's license, they would be very happy to be able to walk or take transit or roll places if that infrastructure existed, but it doesn't. And the ability to move to a city and live alone and earn enough money to pay exorbitant rent, like that's not realistic either. And so folks end up being excluded in ways that they wouldn't be if we had a more inclusive transportation system. Yeah, there's also, I think, limitations to where paratransit serves. I can think of an example of a young woman, Katie. I think she's behind me somewhere on this image. She lives in La Center, which is a little bit north of Vancouver in Clark County, but outside of paratransit service, and so she has a job in Vancouver, and she can't drive, and she can't. There's not transit basically, and so her family has to pay a caregiver to drive her to Vancouver for her job, because also you can't get reimbursed as a caregiver for driving someone for that time. It's again another example of how the system's pretty much set up for drivers and no one else. And let's see if we can change that.
This is Abby. A same story. Like I grew up in Ridgefield. I have a sister, she's 21 years old. She's cognitively disabled. And not having transportation in Ridgefield really, really affects my sister. She cannot even move out and live on her own, like Anna mentioned. And my mother pays people to transfer her to places to go because my mother works full time. Yeah, it's a struggle almost every angles.
Thank you, Abby. It looks like we have time for one more question. Serenity, this one is for you. How are you affected by unplanned or planned elevator shutdowns or maintenance work? Do you feel the detours and alternatives in the past have been acceptable for you?
No, not really. A lot of the times the detours are in danger spots. So say for example, I'm going somewhere with my walker and there's a shutdown elevator. I just couldn't go to that place. I'd have to call and say, I'm sorry, I can't make it. The elevator's down. and well, that would kind of suck. If I'm on my trike, for example, I could possibly reroute some other way, but that would take me a while to figure out a good route for.
Thank you, Serenity. And I wanted to give each of you a chance to give any closing remarks. If you had anything left to say, we have about 3 minutes of the program remaining.
Mhm.
One thing I wanted to say, this is Abby. It's just a request. Please consider about putting fair instructors, at least like underrepresented community like myself, not to put like people who can just monster to me in the train, so I don't have to be stressed and traumatized all the time when I get in the train. Thank you.
Abby, that reminds me of one thing that happened to me years ago. I think I was at a Max stop up in North Portland somewhere. It was very cold, so I had a wool coat on and I just put my gloves on. I had like 3 or 4 old transit tickets in my pocket. And there were like 3 transit cops going around checking fares and they asked to see mine. And I not only had I just put my glove on, but my right hand is sort of paralyzed. So I had to reach into my pocket and sort of fumble around because I could feel nothing. And I just pulled out something. I think it was like 3 wet tickets that they couldn't see. But I did have a ticket.
Yeah, I always have my ticket, but they're asking for something I didn't know, and they are not a patient to explain what they're looking for. So it's kind of like, for me, it just very stressful.
Oh, I can imagine, yeah. Oh, it stressed me out a lot.
And they can see me completely. I have a mic in with me. I'm totally blind. If they're asking under citizens card, whatever, I don't know, they could take a time to explain to me so I can say I don't have it or I don't know about it. But they don't want to because they have a privilege of aggressively yelling at me and stressing me out on the train.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Abby, and the rest of our panelists. In closing, thanks to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to Serenity, Anna, Abby, David, and Steve. Thank you to our sponsors listed on the SCID conference website. And thank you so much to everyone for coming. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.